Peace be upon you. What if one day the media released this breaking news? For his 20th term, the president received 99% of the votes. Hence, all the wealth and goodness in the country, all the excellence, success, progress, and prosperity around the clock is due to His Excellency, the President. I don't think it'll take you long to realize that the chief's propaganda machine is lying about both the percentage and the deduction. This is exactly what the myth propaganda does by claiming that the human genome is 99% similar to the chimpanzees. And we've shown in the last episode how this lie was cooked up in the myth's kitchen in several steps. The episode was shocking to many. Today, dear viewers, the shock will be even bigger when we see the deduction the myth propaganda wants to reach based on this false percentage. It's a distinct chapter of contempt for the human mind by the myth zealots. We will also witness chapters of the greatness, creativity, and capability of the Creator. So, stay tuned. Let's assume the similarity is truly 99%. What do you, myth zealots, want people to conclude from this? Do you want people to conclude that a human is 99% chimpanzee or ape, as implied by the title of your book published by the Natural History Museum in London and the University of Chicago Press in the US? Do you want to delude people into thinking that it's a simple matter for your random mutations and blind natural selection, as all they needed to do was introduce a mere 1% difference and thus genome similarity remained at 99%, and from there, the rest of the processes followed automatically in a domino effect without the need for an all-knowing creator? Are the proteins produced by the two genomes 99% similar to? Are the body systems 99% similar to? And the mental capabilities and emotions that you ascribe to material causes of man and chimpanzee are 99% similar? Therefore, according to the well-known pro-evolution journal, Nature, when we see that 99% of the genes of a particular strain of mice have counterpart genes in humans, does this mean that humans are 99% mice? When the American National Institutes of Health, NIH, states that 60% of genes are conserved between humans and flies, does this mean that humans are 60% flies? When 69% of chromosome X, specific to female, is similar to the chimpanzees, while only 43% of chromosome Y, specific to males, is similar, does that mean women are 1.5 times more related to chimps than men? For example, if we compare two books and find that their words are 99% similar without regard to their syntax and context, can we say that the two books reach the same conclusion with a 99% percentage? If I say, "The dog bit Zaid," is it the same as saying, "Zaid bit the dog"? The words are 100% identical, but the meaning is completely different. If I tell you, "I eat, drink, rise, sleep, walk, run, etc., then I add "don't" to the beginning so that the two sentences become 90% similar in words. Will the two sentences also be 90% similar in meaning? Is this what you mean, myth zealots? Otherwise, what do you want people to deduce from this 99%? Or perhaps you want to say, "No, we did not mean that a human is 99% chimpanzee. What we meant is that the 1% difference between humans and chimps is what causes the huge physical, intellectual, and civilizational differences between the two species. Likewise, the huge differences between organisms are the result of slight differences in their genomes." Okay, our question in this case becomes, can this be the result of randomness and blind natural selection? Imagine you saw on a computer a long poem that described mankind in full, accurate detail. His life, body parts, emotions, and impulses, a flawless, beautifully rhymed poem. On the same computer, you saw another poem that described the chimpanzee in full detail. A rhyming poem as well, but with a different rhyme and syntax. You also found other poems describing the mouse, the horse, the whale, etc., with great similarity in words between the poem. However, in each poem, the same word had a different function, appropriate to its context, to provide a different meaning. The computer did not display any unnecessary or ambiguous words. Is this proof that frivolous randomness generated the poems from each other? Or is the similarity in wording with the big difference in meaning evidence for the poet's mastery, ability, and artistry? How about if that poet wrote millions of beautiful, harmonious poems that share numerous words? We'll concede to you myth zealots to the greatest extent possible. Let's assume that the similarity is truly 99%, and that the huge gaps between humans and chimps are due only to this 1% difference. And that randomness, along with blind selection, produced and differentiated the two species through that difference of 1%. Then answer us. How do you explain the difference between cells in the same body when there is no difference in their genome? It is neither 1% nor 0.1%. Don't middle school students know that genome similarity in the cells of the same body are exactly 100%? However, is a bone cell similar to a neuron? Are brain cells similar to rectal cells? If the answer is no, then what do you want people to deduce from this 99%? And how do you deduce from this percentage that randomness and blind selection caused all life forms in this universe, just as the president's media attributed all success in the country to him? Ask the myth zealots these questions, and let them wander blindly in their transgression. We'll see how genome nucleotides are only the beginning of the story, while more details of wisdom, ability, and inimitable design lie in the translation of these nucleotides. How do the body cells vary widely while having the same genome? How do species vary with all the similarities in their genomes? This is one of the most beautiful and amazing topics. It offers many stories on the greatness of creation, a small part of which we'll explore today. Your body consists mainly of proteins that assemble in different shapes to form organelles. Each of them has its function within the cell. A group of cells forms a tissue. A group of tissues forms an organ. A group of organs forms a system. The digestive system is an example. In this way, the different body systems are formed, and the sum of these systems forms the human body. Well, how many proteins are there in the human body, including antibodies with their tremendous diversity, which the body produces to combat invading microbes? This paper, published in 2018 in Nature Chemical Biology Journal, addresses this question and states that they number in the billions. Billions. This means thousands of millions of different proteins. These proteins are produced by expressing the genetic material whose similarity across the different species is reported on by the myth zealots. How many genes are expressed to produce these proteins? About 20,000 genes according to the 2018 paper. Incidentally, it came as a shock when, upon the conclusion of the Human Genome Project, it was discovered that the number of genes was much lower than expected. So, how can billions of proteins be produced from 20,000 genes only? I will give you an example which will link to the answer. If you logged on the computer and saw 3 files titled The Human Story, The Bird Story, and The Fish Story, you opened these files and saw lines of separate letters at the beginning of each file. Among them was the following line. The exact same line was present in all 3 files. On the first page of the Human Story file, you saw the following versions of this line. This version is the same as the original, but with the dashes removed. And this version is the same, but with the dashes and some letters in the middle removed. This version is also the same as the original, but with the dashes and different letters removed. Then you found, under each version, a meaningful sentence formed by joining the separate letters in each version and adding the necessary punctuation. The first sentence was, "We eat small fish and big fish and birds," humans say. The second, "We eat small and big birds," humans say. The third, "We eat small fish," humans say. 3 proper meaningful sentences that apply to humans. And in the following pages of the Human Story, you saw sentences formed from other lines. Then on the first page of the Bird Story, you saw this version of the same line, and below it, the following sentence formed by joining the separate letters while adding the necessary punctuation, resulting into the following sentence. "We eat small fish," birds say. A proper meaningful sentence that applies to birds. In the first page of the Fish Story, you saw this version of the same line, and below it was the sentence, "We eat small fish," big fish say. By joining the letters and adding correct punctuation, the meaning applies to fish. You didn't find any meaningless sentences from the same line. For example, you did not find a meaningless sentence such as this one. Now, let us apply this example to biology. The genome of living organisms contains genes that are comprised of a strand of nucleotides like the line of letters we explained. What determines which genes are expressed in any given body cell? The answer is the need of this cell. A pancreatic cell, for example, expresses the genes of insulin. An intestinal cell expresses the genes of the digestive enzymes. A brain cell expresses the genes of neurotransmitters, and so on. However, all these cells have the same exact genome, just like the different lines we read in the human story example. This is the first reason for the diversity of cells in the same body, despite the identical genetic material in each of these cells. Moreover, if you were wounded, for example, dozens of molecules in your skin cells will be recruited to the site specific to the collagen gene to express it and produce the collagen protein that heals the wound. Here's another wonder. Do you remember the genome regions they described as junk DNA? One of their tasks is to bind to molecules to help produce the collagen in a miraculous way. This is another reason for the variation of proteins in cells. They form according to your need at a specific time with a specific amount in the specific cell. At the end, a gene was read out in a given cell. This copy is called messenger RNA, mRNA, and it's analogous to the line of letters in our example, where the letters are distributed over parts 1 through 6 and separated by dashes. Here comes the third highly creative reason for variation. Some cells remove the dashes and join the letters to form a long, meaningful sentence. We eat small fish and big fish and birds, humans say. This sentence represents a specific protein suitable for a specific cell. In another cell, the dashes and some letters found here in part 2 are omitted, and a second mRNA is formed. This mRNA is translated into a protein that is appropriate for this cell, but not the first one. This protein is analogous to the sentence, "We eat small and big birds," humans say. In a third cell, the dashes and letters in part 5 are omitted. Thus, a third mRNA is formed and translated into a protein that is appropriate for this cell, but not the previous two. This protein is analogous to the sentence, "We eat small fish," humans say. In biology, this process is called alternative splicing. That is, cutting and deletion take place in different parts of the mRNA. You might say, what determines where the cutting occurs? These dividers, which are copies of what are known as introns, that the myth disciples deemed useless, actually have many functions as published in recent research. One of these functions is determining the exact location of splicing. This means that nothing in the cell is wasted. Therefore, through the process of alternative splicing, the human body can produce various proteins from a single gene, just like the same line can produce many sentences. One of the most fascinating examples are the neurexin proteins found in the human brain, which are essential for normal brain development and function. How many of these proteins are there? Thousands. How many genes encode these thousands of sentences? That is, how many lines of letters? The shocking answer is 3 only. Thousands of proteins are produced from 3 genes only. This is analogous to 3 lines producing thousands of correct sentences. This is mainly due to alternative splicing. The proteins produced after alternative splicing need modifications. This is much the same as adding punctuation marks in our example. The modifications to proteins are called post-translational modifications, PTMs, i.e., modifications after translating mRNA into proteins. This is the fourth reason for the diversity of proteins produced from the genetic material. The same raw protein can be modified in multiple ways to produce different, meaningful sentences. Why was this modification done here, for example, and not there, despite the various sites and possibilities? A protein like titin, for example, consists of more than 34,000 amino acids. The acids may be represented by these pellets. Why was this modification placed here and not elsewhere? We have 34,000 amino acids. Each one can have a number of different modifications. If the matter was left to chance and randomness, the size of the observable universe wouldn't suffice to produce, repeatedly, the specific required titan in every muscle cell. Thus, these PTMs produce different punctuated sentences for us. Each one is right for a specific cell in a specific organism. Different modifications make a protein appropriate for the story of a certain species and not another. These modifications, in the appropriate sites of the proteins, enable them to assume the proper specific, three-dimensional structures. Here comes the fifth step, which is assembling these proteins in various ways to form larger, more complex proteins. This assembly takes various forms depending on the cell, the organism, or the conditions surrounding this organism. And this is the fifth reason for diversity. 5 processes were explained to you, dear viewers. Expressing different genes to produce proteins in different cells of the same organism. Expressing different genes at the suitable time and in the appropriate quantity depending on the conditions experienced by the organism. The alternative splicing process that produces many sentences from the same line. The PTMs that add the proper punctuation to the sentence. Protein folding in different shapes and structures to make more complex proteins. With these processes and others, it is possible to produce billions of different proteins from 20,000 genes only. Otherwise, we would need billions of genes to produce billions of proteins. These processes diversify human cells into thousands of cell types, even though they all have the exact 100% identical genome. Through these processes and others, a human is a human, an ape is an ape, a chimpanzee is a chimpanzee, a fly is a fly, and a rat is a rat, regardless of how similar their genomes are, 70%, 80%, or even 90%, plus or minus. It doesn't matter. Through these processes, you understand why 80% of proteins in chimps and humans are different, regardless of how similar their genomes are. According to this research, this means only 20% are similar. So even if the genome difference was only 1%, so what given that we already know that the difference in proteins is 80%? With these processes, the genomes and their similarity turn out to be only the beginning of the story, and the ability for diversification, synthesis, and differentiation becomes a sign for hearts to submit and for tongues to glorify in those who understand and reason. Don't the leading doctors and university professors among the myth zealots know this? I learned most of it in biology class in my freshman year in college. So it's strange that the leading myth professors don't recall any of this. As they repeat the 99% similarity to chimpanzees, they either cheated on their exams and obtained their degrees fraudulently, or they were too busy preaching the myth to update their decades-old expired information. Or they might be deliberately fooling people and belittling their minds. When we look at the similarity percentage among species at the nucleotides level, which makes up the DNA and mRNA, we find that it isn't 70%, 90%, or 99%, but 100%. They are all composed of 4 nitrogenous bases, similar to 4 letters which form words that are translated into 20 amino acids. From these amino acids, billions of proteins are produced. According to a shocking recent publication, these proteins form billions of species. That is, thousands of millions of perfectly integrated varieties of living species. Billions, if we add bacteria with its different species. Billions of species that maintain the food web and ecological balance, and here is no room for nonsense, meaningless sentences, or failed random attempts. Rather, they're all perfectly designed. You do not see in the creation of the most merciful any inconsistency. Is this proof of frivolity and unintentionality, or of mastery and tongue-tying creativity? Allah says what can be translated as, "And within the land are neighboring plots and gardens of grapevines and crops and palm trees, growing several from a root or otherwise, watered with the same water." Take heed, watered with the same water. But we make some of them exceed others in quality of fruit. Indeed, in that are signs for a people who reason. For which people? Again, for a people who reason. In a previous episode, we saw how some plants are apparently similar while their genomes differ greatly, such as olives and pomegranates. Today we saw identical genomes with great differences in appearance. Greatness and creativity for people who reason. If there were no similarity in genome among organisms, the myth zealots would have said, if there were a creator who willingly created these organisms, why would he make their genomes completely different despite the similarity in the basic processes at the cellular level? Cells in all species need to make proteins to divide, to produce energy, etc. If there were one creator, wouldn't he unify them in these commonly basic components, as a designer might unify the basic components for different devices? Yes, they would have said that. However, they are actually similar. This similarity makes them alike in their building blocks, the proteins, which allows some of them to feed on others, to complete the circle of life by integrating the food web and achieving ecological balance. If the genetic material, and consequently the building blocks, were completely different in the different species, they would be toxic to each other as they don't share common elements. Then, they would have said, if there is a creator, why didn't he make them similar to benefit from each another? Glory be to him who unified by due measure and diversified by due measure, and everything with him is by due measure. So, dear viewers, we have concluded the story of the 99% promoted by the myth zealots. We learned how they lie about the number and its interpretation, how they reinforce the shallowness and scientific gullibility in people's minds, and how they blind people to the amazing and spectacular facts of this universe. All this is for the sake of the myth. Then, the night addicts come to you saying, molecular genetics is the most powerful proof of evolution. Case closed, period. They're relying on the fact that people find it hard to track their nonsense and verify what they've hidden. We pray that Allah has granted us success in revealing in this episode an aspect of the greatness in creation that urges people to contemplate in response to the command of the all-knowing Creator, who says what is translated as, do they not look into the realm of the heavens and the earth and everything that Allah has created, and think that perhaps their appointed time has come near? So in what statement hereafter will they believe? Peace and mercy of Allah be upon you.